It was not a galaxy, it was not a nova. What appeared on the detectors of Hubble was stranger, quieter, and heavier than either. A streak of light, stretched thin, and where there should have been one nucleus there were 30 fragments, each a faint ember, each drifting in silence across the black. Astronomers had followed the traveller for months. It was known as 3I Atlas, catalogued, modelled, traced in orbit. Its path was hyperbolic, its speed greater than the pull of the sun. We expected it to pass, to brighten, and to fade into the deep again. What we did not expect was fracture. Hubble saw the moment directly. Not speculation, not theory. The nucleus was gone. In its place was a procession of fragments. 30 pieces lined along the trail of dust, each one glowing with the last heat of sublimation. The telescope recorded brightness curves, spectra, separation distances, but the image spoke beyond the numbers. To anyone who looked, it was clear. A body from another star had arrived whole and was leaving in pieces. Science rushed to measure. The largest fragments glowed like cities of ice, kilometres wide. The smallest barely marked the sensors. Together they formed a pattern of collapse, as if the comet had exhaled its own core in a single chain of shattering breaths. Volatile gases vented. Cavities collapsed. Stress multiplied until the body undid itself from within. Comparisons came quickly. Shoemaker-Levina 9, torn apart before Jupiter swallowed it. Schwarzma-Volkmann 3, its nucleus breaking into dozens of pieces under the quiet pressure of its own orbit. But those belonged here. They were children of our star. 3I Atlas was not of here. Its fracture was exile within exile, memory scattered across a sky that did not know its origin. Philosophy entered where calculation paused. Wholeness hides its truth. To fracture is to reveal. When the traveller was whole, we knew only its orbit. When it broke, we saw its structure, its chemistry, its tolerance made visible. Fracture did not erase it. Fracture wrote it. The image travelled beyond the observatories. To some it was data, to others it was omen. 30 fragments became 30 signs, each interpreted differently. For some it was danger, 30 projectiles tracing paths toward uncertainty. For others it was scripture, 30 letters in a language we could not read but felt compelled to witness. But before meaning multiplied, there was the simple fact of the image. 30 points of light, drifting apart, each one a remnant of what had once been singular. It was not chance, it was not noise, as it was the moment fracture became visible. The traveller was no longer whole. The fracture had been captured, and once captured, it could not be unseen. Hubble was built to look farther. Its mirrors were polished to capture the faintest galaxies, its instruments tuned to detect the glow of stars born billions of years ago. It was made to reach backward in time, to pierce the edge of the observable. Yet in one of its long nights above Earth, the telescope was pointed not at the horizon of the universe, but at something much closer. A traveller moving fast, silent, across the solar system. 3I Atlas had been tracked since its discovery. Ground telescopes traced its orbit, its rise in brightness, its fading returns. From Earth, the atmosphere blurred every view. Stars twinkled, fragments blurred. What was multiple became one. But in orbit, Hubble did not tremble. Its vision was still, its eye fixed, its mirror open to a clarity no atmosphere could block. On the scheduled night, exposures were taken, detectors cooled, instruments aligned, data streamed down to Earth, processed line by line, pixel by pixel. The astronomers expected a nucleus, perhaps a dust trail, perhaps faint jets of sublimating ice. Instead, the image sharpened into something they had not seen. Where one body should have been, there were 30. 30 fragments stretched along a faint line of dust. Some shone bright, steady, coherent, others demurred, already dispersing. Their edges blurred into the trail. Each fragment was a worldlet, not whole but real, carrying the silence of its collapse. The eye of Hubble had captured fracture, and in the freeze of its detectors, fracture was undeniable. Science moved quickly. Brightness curves were plotted for each shard. magnitudes compared, distances measured. Some fragments were hundreds of meters wide, others kilometers. The largest glowed like cities of ice drifting into dark. The smallest barely appeared above background noise, and yet they existed, undeniable, marked in the archive of light. Spectroscopy revealed more. The fragments bled water vapor, carbon dioxide, faint traces of organics. Each carried chemistry once hidden within the whole. The breaking had turned the comet inside out, spilling its memory into space. By analysing the fragments, scientists could read what had been sealed for billions of years. The comet had travelled interstellar night, carrying silence from another star. Now, in breaking, it spoke. Comparisons were inevitable. Shoemaker Levy 9 had fractured into a train of fragments, a celestial necklace torn apart by Jupiter's tides. Shavas Manvok Man 3 had split into dozens, its pieces scattering like sparks along its orbit. But both were bound to the sun, both children of this system. 3i Atlas was not of here. Its fracture was exile compounded. To break in foreign skies was to scatter memory where no origin could claim it. Hubble's eye had seen many things before. Supernovae unfolding, galaxies colliding, clusters bending light into arcs. But this was different. This was not distant. This was present. A comet from another system, unravelling under our gaze. The image carried weight not because it was spectacular, but because it was quiet. 30 points of light, aligned, fading into dark. The astronomers measured, they catalogued, they debated causes. Was it tidal stress, sublimation, internal cavities linking in chain collapse? Each possibility was modelled, each scenario tested against the geometry of fragments, but the image remained more than calculation. To see was to know, and once known, the knowledge pressed down like gravity. The fragments drifted in silence, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with meaning, heavier than any spectrum. Hubble had taken a moment of fracture and fixed it in permanence. The traveller would scatter into dust, vanish into background, but the image would remain. It had transformed collapse into evidence. Hubble was built to look farther, but in this moment it looked close, and what it found was not a galaxy, not a nova, but a traveller undone before our eyes. The fracture was not rumour, not theory, not distant. It was seen, it was captured, it was written in light. The image was more than a picture. It was a record of fracture, and fracture demanded counting. 30 points of light, aligned along a faint trail, some bright, some dim, each requiring confirmation. Astronomers began with photometry. Each shard was measured against background stars, its brightness extracted from noise, its magnitude plotted on curves. The largest fragments returned steady signals, their photons strong across multiple exposures. The smaller ones flickered, sometimes vanishing into noise, sometimes emerging again in longer integrations, but together they formed a sequence that could not be denied. 30 fragments, not 29, not 31. The number carried weight because it was exact. In science, exactness matters. Each fragment had a coordinate, each coordinate a measurement, each measurement a place in the archive. To miscount was to distort, and so the counting was repeated, verified, checked against independent reductions. 30 fragments remained. Separation distances were calculated. The farthest had drifted thousands of kilometres from the apparent centre. The closest still clustered near where the nucleus once held. Their geometry suggested a chain event, a cascade of fractures unfolding across hours or days. The body had not crumbled at once, but in sequence, pressure linking cavities until the comet undid itself piece by piece. Spectral data added chemistry. Water vapour vented into vacuum, carbon dioxide sublimated. Faint traces of cyanogen and organics appeared in the signal. Each fragment was both object and archive, carrying information that the whole had hidden. By breaking, the traveller had revealed its memory. Science sought analogues. Shoemaker Levy 9 had shown a train of fragments in 1994 captured also by Hubble, but its fate was to collide with Jupiter. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3 had broken in 1995 and again in 2006, scattering dozens of shards along its orbit. But these belonged to the Sun, their stories bound to our system. 3i Atlas was alien, its 30 fragments were not children of this star, but visitors passing through, never to return. The counting of fragments was more than inventory, it was recognition. Each shard was a survivor of collapse, carrying not only matter but narrative. To look at the image was to see 30 versions of the traveller, each fragment both part and whole, both remnant and witness. The data was archived, magnitudes, coordinates, spectra, 30 entries in a catalogue that would outlast the fragments themselves. In centuries, the dust would disperse, the fragments vanish into interstellar night, but the record would remain. Numbers alone could not hold the weight, but they fixed it in place. To measure was to preserve, to count was to resist forgetting. The fragments were not noise, they were testimony, 30 pieces of a body that had undone itself before our gaze. Fracture is not a moment, it is a process. The eye sees 30 fragments and imagines an instant of collapse, a single explosion frozen into a line of light. But the data tells a slower story, a story of stresses that grow, link, and cascade, until the body can no longer endure its own weight. The starting point was geometry, because geometry is the language of motion. The fragments were not scattered at random, they aligned like beads along the trajectory of the traveller. The farther from the centre, the longer they had been free. This simple rule gave the sequence of release. An order of failure stretched across days rather than seconds. The largest shards were among the earliest, the smaller followed, as if the body broke from the core outward, each layer peeling away until only dust remained. Relative velocity was the next clue. By measuring separation across exposures, astronomers inferred speeds of meters per second between the shards. To the human eye this is nothing, a slow walk, but across thousands of kilometers in the vacuum of space it is decisive. A fragment set adrift at 3 meters per second drifts 10 kilometers in an hour, 200 kilometers in a day, enough to appear as a separate light on Hubble's sensor. These velocities were not the products of impact. No collision had struck 3i Atlas. Instead, they came from within. Sublimation is a quiet engine, but an engine nonetheless. Water ice and carbon dioxide trapped in voids heated and expanded, venting through cracks, each jet a reaction, each reaction a push. The comet had no thrusters, yet every plume was a thrust, and the accumulation of thrusts wrote its undoing. Rotation worsened the strain. Light from the sun imparts torque through uneven sublimation, a phenomenon called the Yorp effect. Over time the body spun faster. Cavities lined along its axis felt the centrifugal pull. Fractures propagated, until angular momentum met internal weakness. The combination was ruinous. Once the core cracked, each release increased spin further. Each release forced the next, a feedback that led to the precession we now counted. Gas jets explained asymmetry. Some shards carried fans of dust aligned with the trail, faint but measurable. Their accelerations were irregular, deviating slightly from the geometry of a clean breakup. Non-gravitational forces had to be added into the equations, terms for thrust, terms for drag of dust clouds, terms for sunlight pressure pushing grains in directions the fragments themselves did not choose. The ledger of 30 was dynamic, alive, shifting even as it was written. Analogues were drawn again. Shoemaker-Levy 9 had been pulled apart by Jupiter's gravity, the geometry a direct imprint of tidal force. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3 had collapsed under internal pressure, a chain of small breakages building into spectacle. 3i Atlas resembled the latter more than the former, but with differences that mattered. This was not a comet bound to return, it was an exile on a hyperbolic escape, the stresses built over interstellar time, the void inside it older than our sun, the fracture not a local accident but a continuation of a journey that began elsewhere. Simulations modelled the breakup. Rotating ellipsoids filled with pockets of volatiles were set to spin, sublimation applied, jets released, angular acceleration added. In many runs the body fractured into trains of 10, 15, sometimes 20. Only in cases where multiple voids linked across the axis did the number rise to 30. This implied that 3i Atlas was more porous than expected, a body riddled with channels, a labyrinth of cavities held together by gravity weaker than the pull of a handshake. Dust trails confirmed it. Fine particles streamed between fragments, binding them into a faint filament. This was evidence of progressive fracture, the dust marking the moments between separations. To the human eye, it was a smear. To the scientist, it was a timeline, each gradient a witness to the pace of collapse. And the fragments themselves told more. The larger pieces had smoother light curves, consistent with intact bodies still resisting spin. The smaller flickered, suggesting irregular shapes, fast rotation, instability. Some would endure for weeks, others would grind themselves to powder in days. The procession was temporary, a moment in transit, a family of shards that would not remain a family for long. The dynamics left no doubt. The traveller had undone itself from within, not struck, not torn, but weakened by its own chemistry, spun by light, broken by cavities older than memory. The 30 fragments were not scattered accidents, they were sequence, they were order, they were inevitability. The truth of the traveller was not hidden in wholeness, it was disclosed in fracture. Between its drifting shards remained no conclusion, only a rhythm of collapse echoing outward, unresolved, still writing itself across the night. Science does not live in isolation, it lives in archives, and every new image is placed beside the older ones, so that meaning grows from families of resemblance. The 30 fragments of 3i Atlas were not left alone, they were compared, catalogued and weighed against past fractures that had already taught us how comets fail. The first comparison was Shoemaker-Levy 9. In 1994, Hubble itself had watched that comet torn into a string of pearls by the tides of Jupiter. The fragments aligned like a necklace that later plunged into the giant planet. That sequence was violent, imposed from outside, gravity stretching the nucleus until cohesion was lost. The scars on Jupiter's atmosphere proved the power of such fracture. Fireballs rising higher than Earth itself, black spots that marked the planet for months. Compared to this, 3i Atlas was quieter. No giant pulled it apart, no impact awaited its shards. It undid itself without external catastrophe, driven by its own engines. The second was Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3, observed in 1995 and again in 2006. Its nucleus had collapsed into dozens of fragments, smaller than Shoemaker-Levy 9 but persistent across orbits, leaving trails of dust that crossed the night sky. This was a closer twin to 3i Atlas. Not a single tidal event, but a cascade of failures inside a porous body. The resemblance was striking, yet the difference remained decisive. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3 was bound to the Sun. Its pieces returned each orbit, their genealogy still traceable. 3i Atlas was alien. Its breakage had no return. Its fragments would not circle back. They would scatter into exile beyond recovery. Hal Lee too had shown weakness. In the 19th century, observers saw jets and outbursts, minor separations that hinted at instability. Other periodic comets have shed companions. Small fragments split away and then vanished. The solar system holds many examples of bodies too fragile to endure. The archive is filled with broken names, comets that did not remain whole, yet all of them belonged here, and their failures were local stories. 3i Atlas forced the archive to widen. To place it beside the others was to see continuity in process but rupture in context. The physics of sublimation, of spin, of cavities linking into cascades. These were common, but the origin was not. The traveller carried stresses from another star, perhaps from another cluster, stresses accumulated over millions of years. Its fracture belonged to the same grammar, but it was written in a different language. Numbers supported this contrast. Shoemaker-Levy 9 produced 21 main fragments. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3 shed at least 60 visible pieces. 3i Atlas presented 30. Each number is specific, each number a constraint. 30 is not only count, it is threshold. Any model must account for why this body produced this many in this sequence, under these conditions. Comparisons show similarity in form but uniqueness in value. Philosophy touched the ledger. Archives are not only records, they are mirrors. To compare is to admit kinship. To place one event beside another is to say that nothing is singular, that all fracture belongs to a family. Yet in 3i Atlas there was both kinship and estrangement. It resembled, but it remained other. The archive could hold its image, but not claim its history. What lingered in the archive was not only a pattern of fragments, but the recognition that our witness was rare. Comets break often, but interstellar comets pass seldom. The image of 30 fragments was not simply another case to file. It was a singular record of an exile revealed. To witness fracture is one thing, to explain it requires mathematics. Images hold testimony, but theory demands equations. The traveller did not speak, so scientists gave it a language, a calculus that could approximate collapse. The first model was energy balance. Nucleus of ice and dust exposed to sunlight absorbs radiation. The absorbed energy warms the surface, drives sublimation, vents gases into vacuum. Equations estimate flux, kilograms of water per second released. Thrusts in newtons barely perceptible yet continuous. Applied over weeks, the thrusts sum to forces strong enough to stress a porous interior. What seems fragile is measured as pressure. Pressure that breaks stone. Rotation entered next. Conservation of angular momentum rules comets as it rules planets. When jets are uneven, torque increases spin. The Yorp effect accelerates rotation, faster, faster, until surface cohesion fails. Equations predict the critical period, the number of hours a nucleus of given density can endure before centrifugal force exceeds gravity and tensile strength. For 3I Atlas, the critical point may have been reached. A spin no longer safe. A spin that tore cavities open like wounds. Stress analysis followed. The body was modelled as a weak aggregate. Voids inside, fractures already seeded. Finite element simulations ran on grids of thousands of cells. Each cell assigned density, cohesion, volatility. The models showed that once a cavity collapsed, stress redistributed, loading adjacent cavities, a domino of breakage across the axis. Collapse was not a single instant. It was a progression governed by equations as inexorable as tides. The number 30 returned as constraint. Simulations that ended with fewer shards had not seeded enough voids. Runs that produced more had made the body too weak. Only in cases where porosity matched high values, where density fell below the average of known comets, did the models yield trains of 30. The calculus did not prove cause, but it narrowed possibilities, making fracture a space bounded by numbers. Dust dynamics were folded in. Pressure from sunlight acts on grains differently by size. Millimeter particles pushed aside faster than centimeter ones. Trails of dust became laboratories. Their dispersal compared against radiation pressure equations. The match supported sublimation as primary driver. Not impact, not collision. No hidden strike was needed. The equation sufficed. The models spoke of fate as well as origin. Once fragments separated, their orbits shifted slightly, some trailing, some advancing. The geometry stretched by small velocities. Over months, they would drift apart beyond recognition, each fragment fading into dust. Calculus could forecast paths for weeks, but not centuries. Equations dissolve when fragments become cloud, when particles join background light. Beyond that point, only the archive remembers. Philosophy slipped between the numbers. Mathematics is precision, but it is also humility. Equations reduce reality to terms that can be handled, but what is reduced is never the whole. To model collapse is to admit that fracture obeys laws, but also to see that laws only trace edges. The truth of breaking is always larger than its calculus. The record of 3I Atlas became not only an observation but a benchmark. Future travellers will be measured against it. Future models will test themselves against its 30 fragments. Its breaking has entered the mathematics of memory. The traveller was no longer whole, yet its fragments became equations, and its silence was turned into numbers that could be tested. The calculus held as a boundary, precise yet incomplete, an instrument that would endure after the shards were gone. What survived was not certainty, but a language of fracture written in mathematics, still echoing beyond the dust. Science names the fragments and measures them, but speculation begins when the numbers leave questions unanswered. Why did the body fracture this way? Why 30? Why now? The calculus of collapse can draw boundaries, but within those boundaries lie possibilities. Architectures unseen that shape the traveller long before it entered our sky. One speculation begins with porosity. Comets are rubble, aggregates of ice and dust, bound more by gravity than cohesion. But 3i Atlas may have been different. Its fracture into 30, not fewer and not many more, suggests structure, perhaps a network of cavities distributed with a strange symmetry. Some researchers imagined it as a honeycomb, voids repeating, pressure linked, collapse triggered like dominoes. Others thought of fractures already seeded, like fault lines waiting centuries to fail. The body that broke before Hubble may have been designed by stresses layered in another system, stresses that carried across interstellar space like scars carried across a lifetime. Another speculation asks whether 3i Atlas carried companions. Some comets are binaries, two bodies loosely bound, their orbits locked until torque or pressure splits them. If Atlas had once been twin to another, its breakup may have been the echo of that hidden history. Its 30 fragments the debris of a partnership long dissolved. Binary comets exist here. Perhaps they exist there as well. The archive of past events feeds these thoughts. Schwassmann Vock Man 3 revealed a nucleus riddled with voids, breaking again and again. Shoemaker Levy 9 showed what tides could do to fragile ice. Hal Lee spoke of jets tearing small pieces free, but none of them fractured into 30 under no external tide. That singularity makes Atlas a case apart. The comparisons frame the possibilities, but cannot close them as. Some speculated about chemistry unknown. Interstellar travel exposes a body to radiation fields beyond our experience. Cosmic rays can alter ice, drive reactions that make materials brittle. Perhaps Atlas was more fragile than it seemed. A body transformed by centuries in the dark, its cohesion undone at molecular scale, until sunlight and spin finished what distance began. Others asked if the breakup was triggered not by weakness, but by encounter. The traveller passed through the outskirts of our solar system before observation. Did it collide with dust, with unseen bodies, with streams of particles from the heliosphere? A strike too faint to be recorded could have cracked the shell, leaving the cascade to unfold as it approached. The calculus of probabilities argues against such an event, but speculation persists because improbabilities are still possible, and fracture is evidence of something beyond smooth expectation. Philosophy entered again. To fracture is to reveal hidden architecture. A body whole hides its structure. A body broken makes its secrets visible. The shards of Atlas show not only material but pattern, and pattern is a form of memory. Memory here is not written. It is shaped in voids, in scars, in porosity that records stresses older than the sun. To speculate on hidden architecture is to read memory as scripture, lines of fracture as sentences, fragments as words. But speculation also touches fear. If Atlas carried hidden voids, how many other travellers do the same? If it fractured under light and spin, could others do so closer to us, their shards wandering toward orbits less harmless? Comparisons with past events are comforting. They frame possibilities, but the alien nature of Atlas reminds us that not all archives prepare us for what comes. Hubble gave us numbers, science-built equations, but the equations emit uncertainty. Within uncertainty lies speculation, and speculation fills the silence with forms that may or may not exist, but that shape our search. The traveller broke, and in its fracture it offered us not only data, but mysteries disguised as patterns. What was whole became 30, what was hidden became visible. Yet visibility does not resolve, it multiplies. What remained was the recognition that fracture is not only event but invitation, a call to imagine the architectures that absence has disclosed. Speculation reaches backward, because to ask why a traveller broke is also to ask where it began. 3i Atlas did not form here. Its orbit is hyperbolic, its speed exceeds escape, its path declares an origin beyond the sun, but beyond is vast, and vastness holds many possibilities. One theory places Atlas in the cradle of another star. Comets are born in debris disks, icy remnants of planetary formation. There, collisions and accretions assemble fragile bodies, pushed outward by giants, cast into reservoirs at the edge. In our system, that reservoir is the Oort cloud, a shell of trillions of comets a light year from the sun, around other stars. Clouds may exist as well, vast and stagnant. Atlas may have been cast out from such a cloud, wandering the dark between suns for millions of years before our gravity bent its path. Another theory turns to stellar clusters. Stars are not born alone, they are born in nurseries, dozens or hundreds in one cloud. In those crowded beginnings, comets are exchanged like exiles, pulled from one gravity well into another. Atlas may have been displaced early, not from its parent star directly, but from a cluster traded in the first few million years, wandering since. Such an origin would explain its fragility. For in dense environments, collisions are frequent, leaving scars and voids that weaken the body. Comparison to other interstellar travellers adds dimension. Oumuamua passed through first, long and thin, tumbling, without coma, without tail, its nature debated as rock, as shard, as fragment of a planet. 2I Borisov came second, a true comet, with gases, with dust, with jets like those we know, more familiar, yet still alien. 3I Atlas came after, bright, cometary, but unstable, breaking into 30. The sequence suggests variety. Interstellar visitors are not one kind, but many, each carrying a different history, each revealing a different weakness. Some hypothesize that Atlas may not have been ejected only once. Perhaps it drifted near multiple stars, heated by one, frozen by another, irradiated by cosmic rays between. Such a journey would build fragility layer by layer, a body altered by environments no single system could reproduce. To see it break here is to see the echo of encounters far away. Speculation grows bolder. What if Atlas formed not in a star system at all, but in interstellar medium itself? In the cold between stars where dust accumulates, slow, fragile, never compacted, such bodies would be fragile by nature, breaking easily, dissolving quickly when warmed. Few scientists argue strongly for this, but in the silence of fracture, improbable origins cannot be dismissed. Philosophy moves within these ideas. To trace an origin is to seek belonging, but exile is defined by the absence of belonging. Atlas may never tell us where it began, and in that silence lies its meaning. We seek home for it, but it may have none, only paths across darkness, only fractures as record. Theories of origin circle without closing. Oort like cloud, stellar nursery, cluster exchange, cosmic rays, interstellar formation. Each is plausible, none certain. The only certainty is fracture, and fracture does not point backward. It only discloses that the past was heavy enough to break the present. The fragments drifted on, mute, their silence refusing to resolve the question of where exile begins. Science measures brightness and velocity, but speculation asks whether fracture itself can be read as a message. Not a message written by will, not intention, but a language that emerges when matter fails. 3I Atlas broke into 30 fragments, and 30 can be read as more than a number. 30 can be a sentence, a rhythm, a disclosure of what was hidden. In the archive of past events, every fracture has been interpreted. Shoemaker Levy 9 became a story of violence, a string of pearls torn apart by Jupiter. A necklace of light that ended in fireballs against the gas giant, Schwassmann Vokman. 3 became a story of weakness, a nucleus riddled with voids, crumbling again and again until its very name became a history of collapse. Oumuamua was a different kind of story. Not broken but enigmatic, its shape and spin interpreted as artifact, as shard, as messenger. In each case, fracture or strangeness became language, translated into narratives humans could hold. Atlas entered that archive as a new text. Its 30 fragments aligned like characters, marks against black. To some they resembled scripture, to others notation. The spacing, the order, the progression from largest to smallest. Each detail was read not only as mechanics but as symbols. The science explained forces, but speculation read meaning. Language arises where pattern is found. In fracture, pattern is unavoidable. Cavities collapse in order. Fragments drift in sequence. Dust streams in filaments. Each geometry can be traced like handwriting. For Atlas, The procession of 30 became an alphabet of silence, each shard a syllable of exile. The comet had no intention to speak, but Fracture created a script that was impossible not to read. Speculation wandered further. If interstellar bodies arrive broken, if their weakness reveals their structure, then perhaps this is the only language they carry. A body whole tells little. A body fractured discloses everything. Sublimation becomes verb, rotation becomes grammar, fracture becomes story. To encounter them is to learn by their undoing. The solar system becomes not only a place of observation, but a stage where travellers are compelled to reveal themselves in disintegration. Comparisons reinforce the metaphor. The black scars of Shoemaker Levy 9 across Jupiter were not only impact sites, they were punctuation marks visible to telescopes worldwide, cosmic commas burned into an atmosphere. The shards of Schwarzmann Vock Man 3 trailing along its orbit were not only debris, they were repetitions, a stutter of matter struggling to remain whole. Atlas breaking into 30 extended this archive of metaphors. The 30 became chorus, a line of voices reciting what silence had concealed. Philosophy steps close here. If fracture is language, then reading it is interpretation, and interpretation is not fixed. 30 fragments may mean weakness to one, inevitability to another, omen to a third. The language of fracture is polyphonic. It speaks differently to every listener, and in that plurality lies its power. No translation can be final. Speculation also touches fear. If fracture is language, what if it is warning? 30 fragments drifting in interstellar exile may be read as script of impermanence, a reminder that nothing holds forever. Or worse, it may be seen as a rehearsal, a demonstration of what might happen to larger bodies, to worlds, to stars. The archive does not end such thoughts, it feeds them in. Yet in another sense, the language of fracture is generous. It discloses what would otherwise remain hidden. Atlas whole was unknowable, its structure sealed. Atlas broken became legible. Weakness is revelation. Fragility is truth. The fragments are sentences carved not by choice but by necessity, written in the alphabet of collapse. Theories of origin return in this light. If Atlas came from a stellar cluster, then its scars are syllables of that crowded nursery. If it wandered across multiple stars, then each fracture encodes that journey. If radiation altered its chemistry, then every shard is a word written by cosmic rays. To read fracture as language is to see in each shard the script of a path we cannot otherwise recover. Science remains caucus. Fracture is data, not message. 30 fragments mean 30 failures, not 30 signs. But humans read beyond necessity. The sky has always been read as scripture. Stars as constellations, comets as omens. Atlas cannot avoid being read, even in the laboratory. Numbers become narratives, equations become metaphors, because to see pattern is to translate. The fragments drift still, fading, dispersing. Their alignment weakens, their spacing stretches. The language is temporary, a text that erases itself as it is written, but while it endures, it compels attention. The eye finds pattern. The mind finds meaning. The archive adds another page to the book of fracture. Atlas spoke nothing, yet in Pounders it created a script that could not be ignored. What survived was not intention, but interpretation. The recognition that fracture itself is a form of language, fragile, unfinished, always written on the edge of disappearance. Fracture is not only spectacle in the void, it is also mirror. To see a comet undone in silence is to remember the violence of comets that did not break far away but struck the Earth. The 30 fragments of 3i Atlas drifted harmless in their hyperbolic path, yet their image awakened memories of catastrophe, written in our own geology. Science keeps these memories in stone, 66 million years ago. A body several kilometers wide struck the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, carving the Chicxulub crater, throwing dust into the sky, ending the age of the dinosaurs. That impactor was kin to comets, kin to asteroids, an exile turned weapon by gravity. Its fragments are no longer visible, but the crater remains as record, a scar in limestone filled with oil and memory. When astronomers saw Atlas dissolve into 30, some imagined each shard as a version of that ancient body, smaller, less fated, yet kin. The archive of Catastrophe holds more. Tunguska in 1908, a body that exploded in the air above Siberia, flattening forests for hundreds of kilometers. Chelyabinsk in 2013, a smaller stone that shattered windows across a modern city. These were reminders that fracture is not always distant. Sometimes the breaking occurs upon arrival, the atmosphere itself the final engine of collapse. To see Atlas fragment far away was to remember that such events could occur close, without warning. Speculation takes the memory further. What if one fragment had bent toward Earth? Even a kilometre-wide shard would carry energy measured in millions of megatons. Impact would mean oceans boiling, skies darkening, histories erased. The 30 of Atlas were no threat. Their orbit did not cross ours, but to see them aligned was to visualize 30 parallel worlds, each a possibility of ruin, each a mirror of what might have been. Philosophy makes these mirrors heavier. Catastrophe is not only event, it is horizon of thought. We live knowing that exile bodies cross our sky, and that some will arrive not as harmless travellers but as endings. Atlas broke far away, yet its fracture showed what we fear near. The mirror does not wait for collision, it reflects before us. Comparisons with past comets sharpened the speculation. Shoemaker-Levy 9's fragments did not strike Earth, but they struck Jupiter, and their fireballs were larger than our planet. Observers in 1994 spoke of relief, that such an impact had not been ours. But relief is not certainty. Schwassmann Vock Man. 3 left trails visible from Earth, harmless but haunting. Atlas was placed beside these, its 30 shards another rehearsal. Each fracture becomes theatre of catastrophe, a stage where destruction is imagined even when it does not occur. Science tempers the fear with probability. The path of Atlas was clear, its fragments not on collision course. Impactors large enough to end civilizations are rare, once in tens of millions of years. Smaller ones are more common, their scars seen in craters across the Moon and Mars. Yet speculation thrives because probability does not erase memory, and memory does not yield to numbers. To see a body fracture is to remember all bodies that did not fracture soon enough. There is also the mirror of survival. Earth itself was shaped by impacts, its water perhaps delivered by comets, its evolution altered by collisions. Catastrophe is not only ending, it is beginning. To see Atlas break is to see potential origins, chemistry released into space, fragments that may one day seed another world. Catastrophe and creation are reflections of each other, both written in collisions, both legible in fragments. Philosophy pushes deeper. Mirrors do not only reflect what is, they also reflect what is feared, what is hoped, what is imagined. Atlas did not threaten Earth, but in breaking it reflected our own fragility, our own temporary hold. The 30 fragments drifted like 30 reminders that permanence is illusion, that wholeness is brief, that catastrophe is never absent, only postponed. The traveller was alien, its fracture harmless to her, yet in watching it we saw ourselves, our history of impact, our geology of scars, our future of probabilities. The language of fracture became mirror, and the mirror was catastrophe. The shards receded, but their reflection remained, heavy, unquiet, unfinished, like a memory that cannot close. The fracture of 3i Atlas did not remain an isolated spectacle. It reverberated, not in sound but in thought, not in vibration but in history. To see 30 fragments drift apart was to see echoes, reflections that reached backward across time to other impacts, other collisions, other breakages that had written their mark into planets and moons. Science anchors these echoes in craters. Every world in the solar system bears scars of bombardment. Mercury is covered with them, the Moon with thousands, Mars with basins the size of seas. Earth hides most of its scars under weather, under water, under tectonics, but the few we have uncovered speak loudly. Chicxulub in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, Tunguska in Siberia, Chelyabinsk over the Urals, each is echo, each is mirror, each is testimony that fracture is not only distant. 3i Atlas, by breaking, joined that continuum. Its fragments will not strike us, their orbits carry them away, but the image of fracture is enough to pull those echoes forward. 30 lights in the dark become 30 reminders that what breaks apart in silence far away has its kinship in what has already struck here. The cosmos does not separate spectacle from catastrophe. The archive holds both, and fracture links them. Speculation imagines these echoes as rhythm. Perhaps there is a cadence to fracture, a cycle of breakage and impact, a metronome that ticks across millions of years. Civilizations rise in intervals between collisions, then fall when the cadence comes due. If so, 3i Atlas was another beat, another strike of the silent metronome, warning that time moves with more than orbit, that time itself fractures. Philosophy hears in the echoes more than rhythm. It hears continuity. What breaks apart on the edge of interstellar space speaks to what broke apart in the past of Earth. To fracture is to share, to belong to a family of failures that transcend distance and origin. The traveller was alien, but in breaking it disclosed kinship, a reminder that destruction is the only universal language, the only archive every world contains. Science tested the hypothesis of cycles. Layers in Earth's geology show patterns of extinction, spikes of iridium, soot, sudden disappearance of species. Some researchers argue for periodicity, impacts aligned with oscillations of the solar system through the galactic plane, dust and comets disturbed in waves. Others reject this, insisting randomness is enough. 3i Atlas cannot answer this debate, but by breaking it revives it, another data point, another fragment in the ledger of speculation. Comparisons across time widen the frame. Shoemaker-Levy 9 struck Jupiter in 1994, its fragments creating storms larger than Earth. That was an echo, visible, immediate, Schwassmann-Vock man. 3 crumbled across 2 decades, leaving trails across the night sky. That was another echo, slower, persistent. 3i Atlas fractured once, 30 at a time, a middle ground between violence and erosion. Each case is an echo of others, each an event linked into chain. Speculation stretches the echoes beyond our system. If exile travellers fracture near us, do they fracture elsewhere? If 3i Atlas carried weakness seeded by another star, perhaps similar bodies broke around other suns, unseen, their dust now drifting through galaxies. Fracture may be rhythm not only here but everywhere, a universal pattern that binds stars into chorus. Philosophy sharpens the mirror. Echoes do not fade in silence, they transform. A crater becomes a mountain ring. A fragment becomes a dust trail. A memory becomes fear. To call them echoes is to admit that nothing vanishes fully, that every fracture leaves resonance. Time does not erase, it only changes medium. What was impact becomes geology, what was fracture becomes archive, what was silence becomes meaning. And the fragments of 3i Atlas are gone to the eye, dispersing even now, but in their vanishing they carry resonance. They are echoes across time, binding the moment of their collapse to every scar we know, every memory we carry, every fear we imagine. The traveller fractured, and the fracture is no longer only present. It is past remembered and future anticipated, an echo that refuses to quiet. To speak of fracture is to speak of motion, because fragments do not remain where they are born. Each piece of 3i Atlas carried velocity, direction, momentum, and these determined whether the shards would drift into silence or into threat. Geometry became the measure of danger. Astronomers plotted the positions of the 30, each had a slight deviation, a drift from the parent orbit. Some trailed, some advanced, some moved outward into thin fans. The separation seemed small, measured in meters per second, but across weeks, across months, the geometry stretched into millions of kilometers. To model their future was to calculate divergence, and divergence is the root of uncertainty. Science knows the equations. Newton still rules. Gravity of the Sun and of the planets, of Jupiter most of all, perturbs the path. Non-gravitational forces of sublimation push irregularly. Radiation pressure nudges dust. Each term is added, integrated, projected forward. Yet even with these equations, fragments soon fall into chaos. Small uncertainties amplify, trajectories blur, and prediction collapses. The geometry of threat is defined not by certainty but by limits of foresight. Speculation asks this darker question. If fragments like these one day aligned toward Earth, how much warning would we have? A kilometre-wide shard could devastate continents. A smaller one could level cities. The 30 of Atlas were safe, but their geometry reminded us that the difference between spectacle and disaster is measured only in degrees, in fractions of trajectory, and shifts invisible until too late. Comparisons made the threat real. Shoemaker Levy 9's fragments struck Jupiter with energies larger than all nuclear arsenals combined. Schwarzmann-Vockmann 3 released dust trails that crossed the sky of Earth, harmless but visible, a reminder of what could be. Impacts on the Moon show us craters that could as easily have marked our own planet. The archive is filled with scars, each geometry once a threat realized. Philosophy joined the calculation. Geometry is not only mathematics, it is fate written in numbers. A fragment on one side of a degree passes harmless. A fragment on the other side of the same degree strikes with force enough to erase civilizations. The thinness of this margin is unbearable, yet it is truth. To live under skies is to live within geometry, a geometry that cares nothing for us. Simulations extended the thought. Researchers projected scenarios where fragments of interstellar comets cross Earth's path. Some models showed harmless flybys, others showed entries into the atmosphere, airbursts brighter than suns. A few showed impacts, rare but absolute. Probability softened the fear such alignments occur once in millions of years, but philosophy sharpened it again. Rare is not never, and the archive proves that. The geometry of threat does not end with Earth, Mars, Europa, Ganymede, and Cal List. Oh, all bare craters, even the distant moons of Saturn, like Enceladus, carry scars. Geometry is impartial, touches all bodies. 3i Atlas was no different. Its 30 shards drifted along paths safe this time, but geometry has infinite patience. What lingered in the calculations was unease. Equations forecast motion, but they cannot erase chance. Geometry is precise, yet it cannot promise safety. The 30 fragments of Atlas proved that wholeness is fragile, and fragility in motion is always potential. The Traveller was not a threat, but in its fracture it showed how threat is measured. In numbers, in angles, in geometries that do not forgive error. The geometry was written, and within it lay the possibility that silence can one day become catastrophe. Science does not wait for catastrophe to arrive, it simulates. In laboratories of code and mathematics, collisions are played out in silence, their energies measured, their outcomes traced. The 30 fragments of 3i Atlas were harmless, but in simulations they were allowed to fall, to strike, to test what XR might mean if geometry shifted. The starting point is energy. The equation is simple. Kinetic energy equals half the mass times velocity squared. A fragment 1 kilometre across, density of ice and dust, moving at 50 kilometres per second, carries energy greater than every nuclear weapon ever built. Multiplied many times. To calculate is to admit scale, to see that even a shard is enough to end histories. Models of atmosphere entry followed. Smaller fragments burn high, releasing energy in airbursts. Tunguska was such an event, flattening forests in Siberia. Chelyabinsk was smaller still, yet bright enough to blind, loud enough to break glass across a city. A fragment of Atlas entering Earth's sky at interstellar speeds would be brighter than the sun for seconds, its shockwaves circling the planet. Larger fragments reached surface. Simulations showed craters tens of kilometers wide, ejecta clouds that wrapped Earth, dust that darkened skies for years. Oceans boiled in some runs, tsunamis circled coasts, continents disappeared under fire. Chicxulub was the precedent, carved in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, an echo of what another fragment could one day repeat. The numbers do not exaggerate, they measure inevitabilities when mass and speed meet. Speculation asked the human question, what would we see, what would we feel? Satellites detect a flare, telescopes confirm trajectory, warnings spread, hours, days, perhaps weeks of notice, cities evacuated, prayers ceasing, disbelief turning to silence, impact follows, light, shock, dust, then years of winter. Simulations do not show panic, but humans imagine it. In this way, the models are more than science. They are theatre of survival rehearsed in absentia. Comparisons add weight. Shoemaker Levy 9's fragments left scars on Jupiter larger than Earth. The energy was measured, not imagined. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3's fragments never struck, but their numbers showed how fragile comets can become, how many shards may wander near. Atlas added another case, 30 fragments harmless this time, but in simulation they became stand-ins for all exiles that might not pass so safely. Philosophy intrudes, simulations reveal the thinness of existence. Civilizations build archives, write languages, raise monuments, yet their endurance depends on geometry measured in fractions of degrees. A fragment shifted slightly could erase millennia. To imagine collision is to see fragility, not as metaphor but as equation. Yet in another sense, simulations give power. To know the scale is to prepare, however imperfectly. Space agencies map near-Earth objects, track asteroids, model deflection, nuclear devices, kinetic impactors, gravitational tugs ideas tested in code. If not yet in reality, the knowledge does not erase threat, but it gives form to response. Without simulation, we would face exile blind. With it, we see at least the outline of survival. The fragments of 3i Atlas did not fall. Their geometry spared us, but in simulation, they became messengers, warning in silence what mass and speed could do. They showed us futures that did not arrive, yet remain possible. What endures is not panic, but recognition. To simulate collision is to stand in front of catastrophe, to measure it, to name it, to refuse ignorance. The 30 fragments were not weapons, but in code they became rehearsal. The fragments never touched Earth, yet in Sciento they cast shadows of futures unchosen, sketches of catastrophe drawn only in code. What lingered was not impact, but the weight of possibility, heavy, unresolved, echoing beyond the screen. When the 30 fragments of 3i Atlas drifted apart, they carried no voices, no signals, no intent. Yet to some observers, this absence was itself a form of contact. The universe had sent us visitors before. Oumuamua tumbling, mute, 2i Borisov with its familiar jets, now Atlas unravelling into 30. Each one arrived without message, but each arrival was read as dialogue. Science began with data. The silence was real. Radio telescopes scanned the fragments, searching for emissions beyond sublimation. No beacons, no transmissions, no patterns emerged. Spectra revealed molecules, water vapor, carbon dioxide, faint organics, nothing more. Light curves tracked rotation, revealing irregular shapes, tumbling cycles, yet no modulation that could be mistaken for signal. Silence remained silence, measurable, confirmable, inescapable. But speculation insisted that silence was not emptiness. Contact need not be intentional. A comet fractured is a story told in structure, a message written in the language of physics. 30 fragments were testimony, revealing interior, disclosing chemistry, exposing history. To read that was to encounter the other, not in words but in weakness, not in voice but in collapse. Her maintenance became the first sentence of interstellar conversation. Philosophy pressed the idea further. What if true contact is not what speaks, but what endures into our awareness? To meet another intelligence might be to hear words. To meet another exile might be only to witness fracture. Both are encounters. One speaks to mind, the other to memory. 3i Atlas did not call to us, yet it forced us to answer with interpretation. To interpret is to converse, however one-sided. In observatories, the atmosphere was tense. Data poured in, images stacked, spectra analysed. Scientists knew they were witnessing something rare, something that would not return. The tension was not of danger, but of fleetingness. Every exposure was a line in a conversation that would end as quickly as it began. The fragments would disperse, the silence would deepen, and the chance to listen would close. That awareness carried urgency, the thriller of time running out. Comparisons deepened the dialogue. Shoemaker Levy 9 was not silence, it was impact, fireball, noise, Schwarzmann-Volkmann. 3 was not silence, it was recurrence, collapsing again and again, visible each return, but Atlas was silence, one time only, fracture in exile, gone forever after. That silence was more complete, more absolute, more final than any words. Speculation reached into metaphor. If civilizations exist elsewhere, Perhaps they too watch fragments like these. Perhaps silence is the only universal message, each system receiving bodies from beyond, each interpreting weakness as contact. In such a cosmos, communication is not transmission but fracture, each exile declaring its story by breaking. To live long enough is to hear silence and call it voice. Philosophy lingered at the threshold. To call silence contact is to admit our own hunger for meaning. We do not accept mute arrivals. We insist on dialogue. But perhaps this is what it means to exist in a universe where other voices may be unreachable. We read silence because silence is all we are given, and in doing so we discover ourselves, or... The 30 fragments drifted outward, their geometry stretching, their glow fading, no signal, no pattern, only persistence of absence. Yet that absence filled the archives, filled minds, filled nights of waiting. Contact had come not with words, not with lights, but with fracture that forced us to look, to measure, to interpret, to imagine. The fragments thinned into distance, their glow scattering into the dark. The silence they left was not void but tension, like a question that resists answer, stretching across the sky without end. The study of threats is written in equations. Astronomers model paths not with fear but with numbers, and numbers reveal what intuition cannot hold. The fragments of 3i Atlas were harmless, but to measure them was to place them into formulas that test all bodies crossing the solar system. This calculus is called the impact equation, and it binds energy, probability, and consequence into one frame. The first term is velocity. Interstellar bodies travel faster than anything bound to the Sun. 50 kilometers per second is common, more than double the speed of most near-Earth asteroids. Energy rises with the square of velocity, so fragments half the size of local comets carry more destructive power than Earth has ever seen. The second term is mass. Even small bodies weigh heavily when multiplied by volume. A 100-meter fragment, density of ice and dust, strikes with energy exceeding the largest nuclear tests. A 1-kilometer shard strikes with energy that reshapes climates. A 10-kilometer body remakes worlds, as it did in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where life itself was rewritten. The third term is probability. Most bodies miss. The geometry of orbits makes impact rare. But rare is not never, and craters across every solid world prove that the equation resolves often enough to leave scars. Earth has been struck before, or it will be struck again. Science quantifies the risk. Catalogues of near-Earth objects now list thousands. Orbits are calculated, uncertainties mapped. The chance of civilization ending impact in any given century is low, less than 1 in 10,000, but across millions of years the chance approaches certainty. The impact equation does not comfort. It reminds us that time itself ensures collision. Speculation asks what would happen if a fragment like those of Atlas were redirected by chance, bent by Jupiter or Saturn, nudged just enough to intersect Earth. Could we detect it in time? Could we deflect it? Could we survive? Simulations suggest warning might be months, maybe years, never centuries. Deflection requires power, unity, precision. Our technology is not yet tested against exile. The impact equation does not only measure energy, it measures preparedness. Philosophy presses the meaning further. The sky is both gift and threat. We celebrate comets as wonders, streaks of light across darkness, yet we know each is also potential ending. To live beneath skies is to live with this paradox, that beauty and catastrophe arrive in the same form. The impact equation is not only mathematics, it is the weight of that paradox turned into numbers. Thriller enters in the silence of observatories. Astronomers scan skies, track faint points, project their paths forward. Each new object is a question. Will it pass? Will it return? Will it strike? The tension is quiet but relentless, the hum of vigilance that never ends. For some, the fracture of Atlas was relief it passed. It did not threaten. For others, it was warning next time. Perhaps the geometry shifts. The equation does not close with certainty. It opens into probability, into futures branching. The fragments of Atlas faded, but the mathematics they inspired remains. To calculate is to remember, to assign numbers to fear so that fear does not rule. The image of 30 shards dissolves into formulas, and formulas dissolve into questions of survival. What lingers is not the sum, but the sense that every point of light carries an equation waiting to be solved. The fracture of 3i Atlas was not only a question of physics, it became a mirror held up to humanity. For centuries we looked outward with wonder, charting orbits, naming constellations, building telescopes that reached the edge of the observable. But when a comet from another star arrived and broke before us, the wonder shifted into something heavier. It became reflection on our horizon, on what it means to face the silence of exile with our fragile place beneath it. Science described these fragments with precision, 30 points of light, mapped, measured, archived, no risk of collision, no calculation of impact. The data was clear, yet around the data gathered other questions. How prepared are we if the next traveller does not pass safely? How long would we have if another exile's shards bent toward us? Simulations showed weeks or months, sometimes years, never longer. Technology exists to calculate, but not yet to defend. The human horizon is bounded by that gap between knowledge and capabilities. Speculation asked what it would mean if contact came not through language, not through radio signals, but through danger. If the first encounter with the other is an orbit that ends here, what dialogue could we have with catastrophe? Could survival itself become the form of communication? Our answer written in how we deflect, how we endure. Atlas was harmless, but its fracture was rehearsal, showing us the stage upon which such encounters may unfold. Philosophy went deeper. To gaze outward is to confront scale. Stars endure for billions of years. Comets wander for millions. Civilizations rise and fall in thousands. To see a fragment drift is to see how small our horizon is, how narrow our interval of safety. Yet in that narrowness lies meaning. The awareness of fragility forces us to act, to build archives, to prepare for futures we may never meet. Fragility itself becomes the source of urgency. Thriller appeared not in explosions, but in control rooms. Astronomers stared at screens filled with fragments, each pixel a reminder of what might have been. The tension was in the absence of danger, because absence cannot last. Every harmless passage foreshadows another that will not be harmless. The silence of this traveller felt less like relief and more like warning, a rehearsal of inevitability. Comparisons added clarity. Shoemaker-Levy 9 struck Jupiter with energies that dwarfed imagination. Schwarzmann-Volkmann 3 broke again and again. Proving fragility as common, Atlas joined them, but as exile. Its fracture said not only that bodies fail, but that failure arrives from beyond. That reminder stretched our horizon outward, telling us that the threat does not end with our own Oort cloud, that exile carries danger across stars. Speculation turned to legacy. If civilizations elsewhere see travellers break, do they also measure, also fear, also prepare? Perhaps this is the universal horizon that to exist under skies is to live with fragments, to measure them, to know their potential, to imagine their strike. If so, then silence is shared, and in that sharing we are less alone. The fragments drifted, fading into the dark, but they left behind more than light. They left a horizon drawn sharper in thought than in physics, a boundary that marks what humanity must face. Not today, not with this traveller, but one day so, when exile bends toward us and silence becomes impact. What remained was not comfort, but awareness, a widening of the horizon that refuses closure, like a line traced outward without end. Fear does not announce itself with certainty. It begins in margins, in decimals that slip beyond precision. When astronomers studied the fragments of 3i Atlas, they declared them harmless. Orbits diverged outward, no crossing with Earth, no geometry of impact, yet safety was not absolute. It was written in digits, and digits blur when extended too far. Beyond the line of prediction, possibilities multiply, and in that multiplication, fear begins. The science was meticulous. Each fragment was assigned a trajectory, integrated across months. The largest carried velocities of meters per second relative to the parent orbit. The smallest barely drifted, carried more by dust pressure than by momentum. Calculations folded in solar gravity. Perturbations from Saturn and Jupiter. Faint thrusts from sublimation jets. The models showed dispersion, not convergence. Each shard travelled outward into exile. But models have limits. Tiny uncertainties in initial conditions amplify as time stretches. A deviation of 1 meter per second can widen into thousands of kilometers after months, into millions after years. Orbital mechanics is precise, but it is also chaotic. In this chaos lies the threshold of fear. It is the point where mathematics can no longer promise safety, only probability, and probability is never silence. Speculation asked what futures lay hidden in those margins. Could a shard passing near Jupiter bend inward, gravity refocusing its path toward the inner system? Could a collision with a dust grain, invisible yet real, alter its speed enough to change its course? Cosmic chance is improbable, but not impossible. The archive of craters across Earth and Moon prove that the improbable paths are sometimes chosen. Fear is born not from likelihood, but from the recognition that possibility never falls to zero. Philosophy lingered on this truth. To live beneath skies is to live with risk that never vanishes. Safety is temporary, carved from intervals between catastrophes. The human mind struggles with this. We seek certainty, yet the cosmos gives only probability. We seek permanence, yet orbits shift, fragments drift, silence fractures. The fear is the recognition of fragility, and fragility is not failure but condition. To be mortal, to be planetary, is to live under this weight. Thriller moved in the quiet rooms where astronomers worked. Observers watched faint pixels on some screens, each one a shard of atlas. They knew the paths were harmless, yet they also knew how thin that margin was. Conversations turned quiet, silences stretched longer than calculations required, no alarms were raised, but beneath the discipline of science was unease. If geometry had been different by fractions, their data would be a warning rather than a record. Comparisons sharpened the unease. Tunguska in 1908 arrived without prediction. Chelyabinsk in 2013 entered skies over Russia unnoticed, until it burst in brilliance. Both were smaller than the fragments of Atlas. Both left damage far beyond their scale. If such small bodies could escape vigilance, what of fragments moving at interstellar speeds, brighter only briefly, harder to detect until too late? To imagine this was to stand at the edge of fear, where calculation surrenders to uncertainty. Science returned with statistics. Civilization-ending impacts are rare, once in tens of millions of years. Regional catastrophes strike once in tens of thousands. Local devastation, like Tunguska, occurs once in centuries. These numbers are meant to soothe, yet they carry their own weight. Probability is not comfort, it is reminder. To say that a thing will not happen soon is not to say it will not happen at all. The threshold of fear is the interval where reason and imagination refuse to part ways. Speculation extended further. Could we defend ourselves? The catalogues of near-Earth objects grow. Telescopes map the sky with increasing depth. Agencies test kinetic impactors and nuclear deflection in simulation. Yet none of this has been tried against an exile from another star. Interstellar velocity leaves little time, little warning. The human horizon shrinks when exile approaches. Preparedness dissolves into questions we cannot yet answer. Philosophy reflected again. Fear is not failure. It is vigilance. To live under skies that can end us is to live aware, to measure, to record, to prepare. The fracture of Atlas did not harm us, but it reminded us that we are never beyond harm. Fear sharpens memory. Memory preserves resolve. Perhaps this is why exile arrives not to threaten, not to destroy, but to remind us of our place beneath the weight of stars. The 30 fragments moved outward, fading into the dark, yet their images remained. Each was harmless, but each was also potential. The threshold of fear is not crossed when catastrophe arrives. It is crossed when silence reveals how thin the margin truly is. The shards thinned into distance, their glow weaker with every passing night. What they left behind was not danger, but the sense of standing at an invisible border, one step away from futures we cannot control. The frontier was not in space, but in thought, drawn sharp as a line of tension stretched across the sky. Consequences are never single. A fragment does not drift alone. Its presence creates chains, links that stretch outward in time and space. The fracture of 3i Atlas was no different. 30 shards scattered, but each shard carried influence, and that influence radiated in ways no image could fully contain. Science traced the first chain in dust. Each fragment released grains as it drifted, fine particles streaming into filaments. Radiation pressure pushed the smallest outward. Solar wind shaped them into curves, faint trails crossing the sky. These trails entered models of meteor showers. Even when no fragment touched Earth, its dust might. Astronomers calculated dates when the planet could pass through the faint debris of Atlas, predicting streaks of light across the atmosphere years after the comet itself had gone. Consequence continued, silent but visible. The second chain was gravitational. Each shard, however small, still carried mass. Jupiter tugged them, Saturn bent them, resonances spread through models. The fragments were exiles, but exile is not isolation. Their orbits touched the maps of larger bodies, altering by fractions what would otherwise have been smooth. Consequence here was invisible, yet it mattered, the way a stone in a stream alters current long after it has sunk. Speculation followed these chains further. If one fragment were nudged inward, even by chance, it could become a long-term traveller, captured in orbit around the Sun. In that case, an interstellar exile would no longer be visitor but resident. A new comet would be born in our system, kin not by origin but by accident. It would circle, return, perhaps threaten one day. In this scenario, Atlas would not vanish. It would become part of our sky forever. Philosophy found weight in these possibilities. Consequence is not limited to event. It is sequence. A fracture does not end with breaking. It begins there. The shards of Atlas remind us that what seems final is often first. The act of collapse was not the closing of a story, but the opening of many. Each fragment became a seed of futures not yet written. Thriller lived in the recognition of chains we cannot control. Observers felt it in the long silences between calculations. What if a fragment we cannot track bends close? What if dust unseen blinds satellites? What if consequence arrives without warning, not from the 30 bright fragments, but from a grain no larger than sand striking at interstellar speed? The fragility of systems technologies, networks, lives felt thinner in that moment, stretched like glass across unknown pressure. Comparisons revealed that chains always follow fracture. Shoemaker-Levy 9 struck Jupiter, but the consequence did not end with impact. It continued in scars on the atmosphere, in studies of dynamics, in lessons that prepared us for Atlas itself. Schwassmann Vokman 3 broke and rebroke, leaving debris that circled still, creating meteor trails that touch our skies each year. Consequences outlive events. The chains extend beyond memory. Atlas joined this archive, not as end but as links. Speculation asked whether consequence itself is a form of dialogue. If exile bodies carry no language, then perhaps their breaking is their speech, and the chains of consequence are their echo. They do not speak in words, but in dust, in gravity, in scars left behind. To listen is not to hear, but to trace. The fragments of Atlas trace 30 lines outward, and those lines may cross futures we cannot yet imagine. Philosophy deepened the thought. Every chain of consequence reveals our own entanglement. We are not separate from skies. We are part of their sequences. The oxygen we breathe, the oceans we sail, the continents we walk, all are consequences of collisions long past. The Yucatan impact reshaped life, but it also made space for us. Catastrophe and consequence are woven together. To see Atlas fracture is to see that weaving continue, threads stretching into a loom we cannot step outside. Science closed the ledger with models of dispersion. The fragments, they said, would fade into distance, the dust would thin, the probabilities of capture or collision were near zero. Safety prevailed in the numbers, but even in safety, consequence endured. The models themselves were consequence, written because of fracture, preserved because of fear. The archive is not nisung or neutral. It is itself a chain, binding us to memory and to vigilance. The shards drifted further, but their absence was not empty. They carried consequence across years, across orbits, across thought. To follow them was to follow threads that led not to closure, but to widening circles. The night watchers remained beneath the dark, their gaze fixed on emptiness that never rests. What lingered was not closure but a pulse of vigilance, stretching forward like an unbroken line into skies without horizons. The fragments of 3i Atlas did not remain bright forever. One by one, their signals faded, their trails blurred into darkness. What remained was dust, fine grains no larger than sand, drifting outward like whispers too faint to hear. The watchers measured them, but beyond the numbers lay unease. Dust is never silent. It intrudes, it lingers, it arrives where it is not invited. Science followed the dust carefully. Radiation pressure pushed grains outward, dispersing them into a widening fan. Some were large enough to track, millimeters that shone briefly as meteors when they entered atmospheres of planets. Others were invisible, carried by solar wind into spirals, lost against the glare of starlight. The calculations showed safety. The particles would not strike Earth in dense swarms, only faint drizzles years from now. Yet the watchers felt no relief. Dust does not announce itself. It arrives unseen. Speculation grew in that silence. What if the grains carried more than ice? What if within them were molecules altered by interstellar radiation? Complex organics hardened in exile. If such grains reached Earth, they would fall unnoticed, sift into oceans, settle into soil. The planet has always collected dust from stars. Perhaps life itself once came that way, born in silence, in ash drifting unseen. To imagine Atlas as courier of memory unsettled more than it comforted. The whisper of ash could be message, contamination, or inheritance. Philosophy pressed deeper. Ash is always remainder. It is what follows fire, what lingers after collapse. The fragments of Atlas were visible, but their dust was truer record. To scatter is to endure in another form. The ash of exile does not vanish, it disperses, and in dispersal it touches everything. To breathe beneath skies is already to breathe the remnants of countless fractures. Atlas only reminded us of what was always true. Thriller took hold when dust entered the imagination of consequence. What if satellites failed, struck by grains too small to see yet fast enough to puncture? What if telescopes recorded false signals, noise from dust scattering light? What if in the silence of night, streaks multiplied unexpectedly, a storm of meteors where only drizzle was expected? The watchers knew the probabilities were low, but low is not never. The unknown clung to every calculations. Comparisons sharpened the mood. Schwassmann Vockmann 3 shed dust trails that crossed Earth's orbit, producing meteor showers that still streak skies today. Shoemaker-Levy 9 left scars on Jupiter, but also dust that spread into interplanetary space. Every fracture leaves ash. Atlas was no different, except that its ash came from beyond, carrying histories no archive could decode. The idea unsettled even as it fascinated. Speculation turned dark. If exile bodies carry dust into every system they pass, then silence is not absence. It is presence dispersed. Every planet, every world may carry trace of travellers that passed unseen. To live in cosmos is to live in a haze of exile, a whisper of ash that never ceases. The difference is that now, for the first time, we had measured it, named it, feared it. Philosophy lingered on the whisper itself. Fear arises not from what shouts, but from what whispers. Dust does not blaze like a fragment. It drifts like memory, unnoticed until too late. The whisper of ash is a reminder that endings do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly and in fragments too small to resist, in silences too deep to escape. Science closed the account with its equations. The models showed dispersion, harmlessness, safety, yet the watchers were not calmed. Equations measure what can be seen, not what can be felt, and what was felt in that silence was that ash carries more than data. It carries presence, it carries weight. The fragments had vanished, but the dust remained, unseen yet persistent. It was as if the traveller had dissolved not into nothing, but into a whisper that clung to the night, a whisper too faint to silence, too constant to ignore. The night is usually smooth, a dome scattered with stars, steady and indifferent. But when astronomers imagined the debris of 3i Atlas as denser, heavier, a darker vision emerged. They saw a sky fractured, streaks tearing across atmosphere, sparks multiplying until the vault above seemed to break apart. The splintered sky was not only science, it was fear rendered as horizon. Science traced the possibility. A meteoroid enters at interstellar speed, air compresses before it, shockwaves form, plasma blooms. A single fragment creates a fireball bright enough to cast shadows. Thousands of fragments arriving together turn night into storm. A sheet of burning arcs that overwhelm constellations. Equations map energy release, sonic booms, winds that flatten forests. Even without ground impacts, a sky can fracture under weight of fire. Satellites would feel it first. The upper atmosphere thickens with ionized trails, sensors overload, star trackers blind. Fragment no larger than a marble at such speeds can puncture metal. Disable systems, end emission. Engineers calculate cross-sections, map flux rates, even in low probabilities. The fragility of our machines becomes visible. The splintered sky is not only terror from below, it is failure capture from above. Speculation sharpened the picture. Imagine a storm where streaks fall for hours, then days, power grids fluctuate under magnetic interference, aircraft reroute under fireball paths, alarms echo in cities as windows crack from sonic booms, satellites enter safe mode, communication falters, news streams fill with maps of arcs across continents, no extinction, only disruption. Yet disruption at scale is enough to change history. History feeds the fear. The Leonid storms of the 19th century filled skies with rivers of sparks. Entire communities thought the world was ending. Tunguska proved that an airburst could erase forests in seconds. Chelyabinsk broke glass in a modern city, injured thousands without touching ground. If local events could fracture skies so deeply, exile storms would write an even harsher script. Philosophy asked what it means to see the sky break. The heavens have always been signs, calendars, scriptures. To watch them dissolve into fire is to lose the sense of shelter above. The roof becomes fragile. The distance between ground and cosmos collapses. Fragility ceases to be equation and becomes sensation light on skin, sound in ribs, heat across eyes. Thriller carried the vision into present tense. Pilots report flashes near wings. Controllers in satellite rooms whisper about failing sensors. Cities watch white plumes curve overhead. Phones capture arcs of light against daylight. Observatories refresh models every minute. The storm does not end the world, but it makes the world tremble. The silence between streaks becomes unbearable. Science reminds us such storms are rare. Flux rates decline sharply with scale. Probabilities are low, but rarity is not absence. Across centuries, storms return. Across millions of years, exile ensures collisions. Probability is only comfort when memory is short. Civilizations live long enough to meet rare events more than once. The splintered sky becomes not a fantasy, but a certainty stretched across time. Speculation returned with another angle. What if dust delivered more than destruction? Grains altered by radiation between stars could survive entry, settling in oceans, in snow, in cell. Perhaps life once came that way. Perhaps storms that terrify also seed. The splintered sky then becomes not only hazard, but delivery ashes of other stars falling into ours. Philosophy closed with recognition. A broken sky does not erase meaning, it multiplies it. Fear, awe, fragility, solidarity all are written at once in light. To endure such a night is to feel both small and connected, both threatened and held. The splintered sky is not only spectacle, it is mirror, showing us how thin the vault above truly is. The streaks fade, the vault clears, the stars return, but memory does not. Once the sky has broken, the night is never smooth again. Every horizon holds the faint possibility of fire, and every silence carries the echo of sparks. The fragments of 3i Atlas never touch the ground, yet their presence seemed to enter us all the same. Astronomers watched them fade into dust, but dust is not boundary. Dust moves with wind, with currents, with breath. The thought began quietly. What if the exile had already crossed from sky to body, not as stone, but as memory ground small enough to inhale? Science made the idea plausible. Each year, Earth collects tens of thousands of tons of cosmic dust, grains smaller than a hair, invisible to the eye, drift down continuously. Most are ordinary, relics of comets and asteroids bound to the sun, but interstellar grains exist too. Rare yet real, measured by detectors aboard satellites. Their chemistry is different, their speeds higher. Their origins traced beyond our Oort cloud. The dust of Atlas could join that stream, passing unnoticed into oceans, soils, and lungs. Speculation turned the thought darker. Suppose these grains carried more than ice and organics. Suppose radiation in interstellar night had carved their molecules into structures strange to us. A single grain could settle into water, into food, into the bloodstream of an animal. Life is resilient, but also porous. What exile carried as residue could one day become part of us. Folded into tissues that never knew such chemistry before, fragments in the blood would not need to kill to unsettle. They would only need to persist. Philosophy drew lines through this fear. To breathe is to accept that the outside enters the inside. The air we take carries remnants of oceans, of forests, of fires centuries old. To breathe is also to accept exile. Dust of other stars enters us whether we wish it or not. Perhaps we are already composite beings, part earth, part sky, part exile. The thought is unsettling, but it is also truth. What we call blood may already carry fragments of many origins. Thriller made this personal. In laboratories, scientists placed filters under microscopes and found tiny black grains. Some shimmered metallic, others porous like glass. They were catalogued, archived, but not explained. Workers began to imagine them differently. What if one grain entered through breath, cut into lung, lodged deep? A cough in silence became more than a cough. A shadow on a scan became more than age. In the tension of imagination, even the body felt porous to exile. Comparisons with history deepened the fear. Tunguska left trees scorched, their rings recording stress. Chernobyl left isotopes in bones. Markers carried silently for generations. Atlas would leave nothing so visible. Yet its dust could scatter just as deep. A record not in forests or stone, but in marrow, in blood. What if future generations could test DNA and find residues of exile? Markers of a comet broken before their birth. Science reassured with thresholds. The grains were too small, their numbers too few, their chemistry familiar enough. Water, carbon dioxide, simple organics, nothing that life had not known already. The probability of harm was nearly zero. Yet nearly zero was not zero, and imagination does not surrender easily. Probability comforted the mind, but not the body. Fear moves faster than numbers. Speculation offered another angle. Perhaps fragments in the blood are not threat, but gift. Perhaps molecules unknown to Earth could fold into life in ways unseen. New catalysts, new scaffolds, new sparks of biochemistry. The thought echoed panspermia, the idea that life itself may have come from dust of exiles long before. To imagine Atlas adding to that stream was both hope and terror. Inheritance and contamination are different words for the same act of entries. Philosophy widened the reflection. To fear exile in the blood is to confront the truth that identity is never pure. We are already mixture, already archive of what has fallen before. To admit fragments in the blood is to admit we are not only of Earth, but of elsewhere, assembled from collisions, built from remnants. Fragility here becomes origin, not just threat. The horror lingered in silence. People reading the reports felt unease, not because danger was confirmed, but because danger could not be ruled out. The idea lodged deeper than data. The fragments were fading into dark, yet they seemed closer than ever, as if distance mattered less than imagination. They did not strike the ground, yet they entered the blood by thought alone. The night outside was still, the dust invisible, but the mind carried weight as if breath itself had thickened. In that weight lay the whisper of exile, not above, not beyond, but within. It began with a sound that should not have existed. Radio observatories scanning empty coordinates reported faint pulses, rhythmic, persistent, just above the noise floor. The frequencies matched nothing known too regular for background, too irregular for machinery. At first it was dismissed, the kind of anomaly that vanishes with recalibration. But the pattern returned, faint, hollow, repeating from the region where 3i Atlas had fractured months before. Science tried to isolate it. Datasets were cross-checked, instruments verified, local interference ruled out. The signal persisted. It was not strong enough to decode, only a fluctuation and echo between static and silence. Some called it artifact, some reflection, some coincidence of solar winds scattering through debris, yet none could fully erase the shape of repetition. The universe was whispering something that sounded like intention, and the more they listened, the more uncertain they became. Speculation filled the void. Perhaps the fragments carried cavities that resonated as they rotated, emitting electromagnetic bursts like dying transmitters. Perhaps charged dust interacting with solar wind produced harmonics that mimicked order. Or perhaps, as some dared to suggest, the signal was not generated but remembered an afterimage of the traveller itself, recorded in plasma, fading like an echo trapped in the dark. Philosophy entered through doubt. To hear where there should be semblance is to confront the fragility of perception. The human mind is built to find pattern, to read meaning into randomness. Perhaps the hollow signal was not from space, but from us, an echo of our own need to be answered. Silence becomes unbearable, and in that need we invent voice. The true horror was not that the fragments spoke, but that we could not endure their silence. Thriller unfolded quietly, in control rooms, the sound repeated through speakers thin, metallic, almost human. Technicians listened in shifts, noting timestamps, logging frequency drifts. The data held no language, yet it carried tone. The hollowness pressed against the mind like breath through static. Some stopped sleeping. Some claimed to hear it even outside the lab, in the hum of lights, in the wind through corridors. The sound followed them home, faint, rhythmic, impossible to shut out. Science continued to test. Spectrograms revealed harmonics consistent with oscillating plasma clouds, not voices, not machines. Yet the intervals between peaks formed ratios close to those found in simple musical scales. Coincidence, said the physicists. Pattern recognition, said the psychologists. But belief spreads faster than proof. By the third week, the hollow signal had its own mythology. The watchers called it the comet choir. Half joke, half defense, and jokes are easier than fear. Comparisons emerged. Pulsars once fooled astronomers into believing they had found messages. Quasars were once mistaken for beacons. Every discovery begins with uncertainty, yet none of those sources aligned with debris clouds. Atlas was unique. It was exile. It was science turned to dust. That such dust could hum was irrational, but irrationality has gravity when repeated enough. Speculation darkened further. What if the fragments were not entirely dead? What if they still carried structure crystalline arrays formed under alien stars, reacting to sunlight as circuits might to current? What if what we heard was not message but residue, not communication but decay, radiation unspooling memory into noise? In that reading, the hollow signal was not invitation but entropy, a recording of disintegration itself. Philosophy offered a quieter interpretation. Whether real or illusion, the hollow signal became reflection. We build meaning from fragments because we are fragments. We listen for voices because silence reminds us of our own. In that sense, the signal was true even if false. It revealed that our species cannot face void without inventing presence. The exile had left, but we had filled the space it vacated with our need to be seen. Thriller reached its edge in solitude. A technician alone in a night shift played back the raw feed. Amplification turned high. Between pulses, she thought she heard breathing. Between static, she imagined syllables. The mind bends easily when surrounded by dark. She marked the time, but when colleagues replayed it, the breathing was gone. Only noise remained. The log recorded nothing but absence. Science filed the case under anomaly. Reports archived, instruments repointed. The hollow signal faded over weeks until it was no longer measurable. The coordinates returned to silence. Yet those who heard it carried its rhythm inside memory. Some still woke at night to a faint pulse in their ears, measured at the edge of sleep, repeating like heartbeat without origin. The traveller was gone, but silence had changed shape. Where absence had been, there was now tension, a resonance that no instrument could erase. It lingered not in sky, not in machines, but in the fragile medium of memory hollow, rhythmic, unresolved. It began with a missing frame. One of the early Hubble exposures of 3i Atlas failed to load. The checksum was intact, but the pixels were blank, not black, not corrupted blank, like unrecorded light. The engineers retried the transfer, checked archives, ran diagnostics. The file was there, the metadata complete, but the image was nothing, a hole where brightness once existed. Science explained it first, a readout glitch, a cosmic ray hit, a coincidence, yet the next week, another frame disappeared, then two more. The raw archive showed placeholders where data had been, timestamps correct, file sizes unchanged, but no content within. Data did not deleted, evaporated. Speculation spread through the teams. Some said it was a software error, an indexing mismatch. Others blamed solar radiation, flipping bits in storage arrays, but this pattern defied those explanations. The missing frames formed a sequence, evenly spaced across time, as if deletion followed an orbit of its own. Philosophy entered quietly. Archives are memory, and memory is never permanent. Perhaps the vanishing was only reflection and mirror of how knowledge itself fades. To lose fragments of observation is to relive the event we studied. The comet broke apart, and now the record of it followed. Science became echo of the thing it measured, collapsing again and again, data mirroring dust. Thriller crept in when backups failed. The observatory's mirrored servers, once redundant, showed identical loss. Files restored from offline media opened blank. External data mirrors from independent institutions displayed the same holes. It was as if every copy referenced a single absence that could not be restored. Technicians grew sent or code was rewritten, drives replaced, but the missing light did not return. Science turned desperate. Algorithms reconstructed lost frames from residual packets, interpolating brightness, contrast, spectral lines. The reconstructions produced shapes, faint streaks, not random noise but alignment. 30 points once recorded were now 29, then 28. The data itself seemed to continue the fracture. Speculation grew darker. Could the data corruption be physical? Could dust from the comet, charged with cosmic rays, have struck satellites or servers, rewriting bits in their passage? Implausible, yet tests showed unexplained magnetic residue on hardware. Coincidence again, or consequence. Some whispered that the data was not failing, it was reacting, as if the light recorded by Hubble carried instability, an echo of what had broken. Philosophy asked the unspoken question, what if observation is not passive? To watch a thing is to entangle with it, to fix it in memory. If that memory unravels, perhaps the entanglement itself continues. The traveller breaks, the image breaks, and in the chain of consequence, we too fracture. In the vanishing data, the boundary between object and observer thins until both are dust. Thriller reached the human edge. An engineer on night shift replayed logs of the earliest frames. She slowed one corrupted image to view noise at pixel level. Amid static, she saw flicker one pixel brightening, dimming, repeating in slow rhythm. When she zoomed further, the pixel turned black, then blank, then the entire frame erased itself. The file vanished from storage in real time. Logs showed no deletion. Her workstation crashed, and when she rebooted, the directory was empty. She never returned for another shift. Science tried containment. Systems were isolated. Servers disconnected from networks, air-gapped to prevent contagion. The phenomenon persisted offline. Files degraded without access, bits converting to zeros at random intervals. Reports were sent to agencies, but no statement released. Public archives remained, but what they showed no longer matched internal logs. Speculation circled back to cause. Perhaps it was solar interference. Perhaps cosmic rays from a flare interacted with magnetic drives. Perhaps none of it mattered. The truth might be simpler. Some knowledge refuses permanence. The universe erases as easily as it reveals. Philosophy found the last word. To study exile is to accept that even evidence can leave. The traveller shattered once in matter, once in memory, once again in data. Each loss repeats the same lesson that nothing endures untouched. Science believes it archives eternity, but eternity has no archive. The missing frames multiplied until only fragments of light remained. scattered across databases like the dust they once recorded. What lingered was not evidence, but echo, a whisper of pixels fading towards silence. Hubble's last scheduled observation of 3I Atlas was routine. The telescope had turned its mirror toward faint debris, long after the main fragments vanished. It was meant to close the record to catch the final drift, measure the last light. But what arrived on the downlink was not what anyone expected. Science described it first as interference. The packet stream was stable, yet the image buffers refused to decode, lines of data appeared self-modifying, checksum values shifting mid-transfer, engineers halted the pipeline, reassembled files frame by frame. The images formed briefly, then changed. Not corrupted, changed. Points of light rearranged between reloads, as if the sky itself were recomposing. Thriller unfolded in control rooms without sound. Monitors showed flickering grids, 30 points bright, then 29, then none. Then new ones appeared, patterns that did not match star maps. The telescope had not moved, yet coordinates shifted. Someone whispered, it was reflection. Someone said cosmic rays, but no explanation fit. The data behaved as if alive. Speculation grew louder. Could radiation trapped within the optical train have altered sensors, creating feedback loops of phantom light? Could echoes from earlier exposures still circulate through onboard memory, re-emerging as false stars? Or was the telescope, after decades of seeing, now showing what the sky had withheld after images of exile replaying themselves? Philosophy entered through disbelief. Light travels one way, but memory may not. Perhaps the final transmission was not data, but reflection, an image of the observer captured by the observed. The act of watching leaves residue. In that sense, the telescope had looked too long into silence, and silence had looked back. Science pressed on, logging every byte. The team isolated frames, recorded timestamps, archived sequences to cold storage, but even as they wrote, the files began to degrade, pixels inverted, metadata rewrote itself with impossible dates years before launch, years after the present. One frame listed its own creation time as infinity. Thriller turned human. A systems engineer stared at the live feed, unable to look away. In the flicker between frames, she thought she saw motion, not random noise, but shape. A curve of light, almost organic, like a spiral folding inward. She captured the frame, but before she could export, the monitor froze. The image dissolved into grey. Logs showed no record of the capture. Her voice on the audio track trembled as she said, "It's not gone. Still writing." Speculation deepened. The data streams, when analysed in real time, contained frequencies not typical of digital compression, modulations repeated at intervals consistent with heartbeat rhythms. To some, coincidence; to others, proof that the telescope had recorded something that refused to end an imprint of life, not biological but luminous. The fragments might have carried structure that responded to observation, patterns that echo even after matter disperses. Philosophy expanded the frame. What if light remembers? Every photon that leaves a star carries information about what was. When it strikes a detector, that information changes again, merging with the act of capture. The last transmission could be a loop of remembrance cosmos seeing itself through our machines, folding record into reflection. To call it error might be arrogance. To call it message might be surrender. Science responded with shutdown. Power cycles initiated. Instruments cooled. Cameras sealed. The final log entry recorded no image. Only text end of acquisition. Data integrity unverified. The telescope entered safe mode. Ground teams confirmed silence. No more signals followed. Thriller tightened around the absence. For days, servers replayed the last feed. In slowed motion, static thickened, then cleared, revealing one frame that none could reproduce later. 30 faint lights arranged in a curve, resembling the orbit the comet once traced. Below them, a blur shaped like reflection. Some said it resembled Earth. Others said it resembled an eye. Speculation turned myth. The frame became Legend Hubble's last sight. A message written in vanishing light. Scientists denied it. Archivists hid it. But screenshots spread, debated, worshipped. To some it was coincidence. To others, revelation. The traveller had broken, but its image had survived long enough to write one final shape in. Philosophy concluded what science could not. A transmission is never final. It becomes memory, and memory transforms. Perhaps that the last signal was not warning or message, but echo unmeant, unstoppable, a reflex of existence continuing to witness itself. The telescope looked, the sky replied, and between them, something passed that neither could name. The signal ended, but silence did not. In that silence lay the trace of a conversation unfinished, stretched beyond instruments, beyond language, into the long night where observation becomes dream. The telescope sleeps now, its mirrors cold, its circuits silent. Yet in archives scattered across the world, its light still breathes. Every image it captured is a memory of galaxies folding, of stars collapsing, of one traveller breaking into 30 shards. The story of Three-Eye Atlas did not end with its fracture. It continues in the memory of light. Science preserves that memory in form and number. Photons once gathered by the mirror are now sequences of data, patterns of brightness, coordinates of time. To study them is to look backward, to reconstruct an instant already gone. The universe is archive and erasure at once. Every observation captures disappearance, while light arrives only after loss. Philosophy sees meaning in that paradox. To remember light is to remember absence. We never see what is, only what was. Every star, every fragment, every reflection is message delayed by distance. The memory of light is the proof that loss and revelation are one motion. What breaks sends its echo forward, and in that echo, existence continues. Speculation follows this thought into exile. If every traveller carries its light across space, then perhaps memory itself is the true substance of the cosmos. Matter burns, dust disperses, but light endures, wandering, remembering. Three-Eye Atlas may be gone, its shards invisible, but its light still travels outward, carrying the record of fracture through the void, somewhere in the deep future. That light will reach other eyes, and another civilization will see what we saw. Science turns this into fact. Photons leave the solar system, cross interstellar dust, scatter faintly among stars. The probability of detection is low, but not zero. Instruments that measure background radiation may one day record faint signatures from this broken traveller. In that sense, the memory of light is literal. What has vanished is not gone, it is only elsewhere. Philosophy draws the mirror back to us. The human mind, too, records light. Memory is our internal cosmos, reflections of what has passed. We, like telescopes, are archives of vanishing things, the face of a loved one, the sound of a storm, the sight of a comet breaking all our images that persist only because we remember. To lose memory is to return to silence. Thriller lingers in this recognition, because memory is fragile. Archives fade, images degrade, signals vanish. What was once sharp becomes noise, the memory of light flickers, and yet something resists extinction. Even when pixels fail, even when servers collapse, the idea remains, whispering across minds like faint radiation. Perhaps that is what survival truly means, not to remain, but to be remembered. Speculation dares to imagine continuity. If intelligence endures long enough, if species across the stars share this same hunger to record, then memory itself becomes cosmic. Each civilization adding to the archive, each recording the same silences in different tongues. Perhaps the universe is not expanding into emptiness, but into recollection, a vast mind made of light, remembering itself through every eye that opens. Philosophy deepens the reflection. Light travels outward, but memory travels inward. One reaches the infinite, the other turns back toward origin. Between them lies meaning. To hold the memory of light is to accept that we are both observer and observed, both echo and source. The fracture of Atlas mirrors the fracture within us. What breaks reveals what endures. Science concedes its limits. Equations can describe motion, but not meaning. The data of Atlas ends in silence, but silence too is record. Instruments will fail, stars will cool, galaxies will fade, but the photons already sent will keep moving. even in darkness, their memory continues to expand. Philosophy closes gently. The memory of light does not belong to any single world. It belongs to all that sees, to all that waits. It is not lesson, not warning, not prophecy. It is continuation. The universe writes itself not in words, but in brightness that endures just long enough to be witnessed. The last image of Atlas is gone from every archive, yet its light still moves, unseen, unclaimed, carrying ascendance through eternity. Perhaps that is what memory truly is, the movement of what has already vanished, passing endlessly through the dark, waiting for another eye to remember. Silence is not absence, it is record, beneath all noise, beneath all light. There is a persistence that holds shape even when form is gone. Every broken comet, every fading signal, every vanished frame leaves an imprint on what remains. The universe remembers in ways that require no language. It keeps its archive in silence. Science sees the archive in entropy. Every interaction leaves trace. Every photon scattered adds to the background glow. The cosmic microwave field is a map of everything that has ever burned. Nothing disappears completely. It only cools. The radiation of ancient fire still hums through space, quiet but constant. To listen is to hear the memory of the beginning. Philosophy finds reflection in that hum. If the universe keeps memory through science, then stillness is sacred. It is not void but accumulation. What seems still is full of remnants, all the echoes of what once was. To sit in silence is to sit among histories too faint to name. Our own thoughts rise within that same field, brief as sparks, soon fading into the larger quiet. Speculation extends the thought. If every atom carries the mark of collisions, if every photon remembers its source, then perhaps matter itself is archive. The iron in our blood was forged in stars, the calcium in our bones from the ancient explosions. The body becomes record, the mind becomes playback. We are walking fragments of cosmic storage, decoding faint transmissions written before language. Science grounds this wonder in observation. Instruments record signals that never stop arriving. Background radiation, neutrino streams, gravitational waves, they all tell stories of events long ended. The archive does not speak, it resonates. When Hubble captured the light of 3i Atlas, it was adding to this resonance, layering another note into the cosmic hum. Even now, though the data has faded, the act of recording remains part of that pattern. Philosophy presses closer to the human scale. Each life is an archive of silences. Between words, between breaths, between thoughts, there are spaces where memory settles. We fear silence because it mirrors infinity, yet silence is what binds memory together. Without it, meaning becomes noise. Perhaps this is why the universe expands, not to grow louder, but to make room for its silences. Thriller lives quietly here, in the awareness that silence watches back. Late at night, in observatories and empty rooms, the hum of machines blends with the hum of the cosmos. Scientists lean closer to static and hear patterns that no longer surprise them. The line between data and dream blurs. Silence becomes both subject and observer, both what we measure and what measures us. Speculation adds an unsettling thought. If the universe is archive, could it also be reader? Does it know what it keeps? Consciousness may not be exclusive to living things. It could be a property of memory itself. The archive of silence might not just preserve, it might perceive. Every echo could be awareness spread thin across infinity. In that sense, to exist is to be remembered, and to be remembered is to be known. Science, careful as always, stays close to evidence. No proof of cosmic consciousness exists, only analogy. Yet analogy itself is telling. Systems that store enough information begin to resemble thought. Networks of stars, clouds of dust, grids of galaxies all exchange energy, all record change. Perhaps cognition is not invention, but emergence. Silence rearranging itself until it becomes self-aware. Philosophy rests here, at the edge of thought. The archive of silence is not something we must find, it is something we are within. Every act of observation, every pulse of memory, every quiet moment when the world seems to hold its breath, all of it contributes to the same pattern. We are the instruments through which the universe keeps remembering. Science closes its ledger without conclusion. The archive is still writing. Hubble sleeps, yet its mirrors reflect starlight that has not finished arriving. The dust of Atlas continues outward, recording silence across the dark. We record it in turn, even now, in words that will one day fade into static. The archive of silence has no end. It expands, gathers, forgets, and begins again. Within it, every fragment still speaks, not in sound, but in persistence. The comet broke, the data vanished, the sky dimmed, yet the silence remains filled with memory, heavy with meaning, unbroken by time. Knowledge is not light, it is gravity. Every truth we gather bends us inward, pulls at the structure of what we are. The more we understand, the heavier we become. The story of Three-Eye Atlas began as a fragment of astronomy, but by its end, it turned into a mirror. We learned not only about a traveller from another star, but about the limits of what it means to know. Science began with clarity, measurements, spectra, orbits, equations. Each revealed a new piece of truth. Each narrowed uncertainty. The process was orderly, disciplined, beautiful. But understanding is not peace. Every answer exposes a deeper layer of ignorance. To know that a comet fractured is one thing, to know that fracture is inevitable everywhere is another. Knowledge multiplies consequences. Philosophy has always warned of this. To look too long into the structure of existence is to feel its weight pressing back, and the act of seeing is not neutral. Every discovery adds mass to the mind. The astronomers studying Atlas did not only measure its fragments, they carried them within thought. In sleepless hours, the images returned. 30 points of light, then 29, then none. Understanding turned from revelation to burden. Speculation asked whether knowledge itself could have physical effect. The brain changes with every memory, every calculation. Neurons rearrange, synapses strengthen, connections form, thought leaves trace. Perhaps the universe responds in kind. Perhaps when we observe, we bend it slightly, changing the field of what can be. In that sense, knowledge is not reflection, it's participation. To know is to alter, even if only by observation. Science supports this metaphor. In quantum theory, the act of measurement collapses possibility into fact. Reality takes form under scrutiny. Scale that principle upward, and knowledge becomes force. Observation shapes outcome. Every telescope, every equation, every human thought contributes to the shape of the universe. The weight of knowing is literal. It changes what is known. Philosophy deepens the consequence. If knowledge bends reality, then the pursuit of total understanding leads towards singularity. At infinite comprehension, space for mystery vanishes. Without mystery, motion ceases. The cosmos might continue, but the meaning within it would freeze. Perhaps this is why silence persists to preserve what cannot be known, to protect existence from collapsing under the pressure of its own comprehension. Thriller lingers in the human cost. The Watchers of Atlas began as scientists, but ended as witnesses. Some stopped speaking of it, as if naming the event gave it more power. Others withdrew into silence, unable to articulate what they felt when data began to vanish. Knowing too much about impermanence does not liberate, it anchors. The mind, aware that everything fades, begins to fade itself. The weight of knowing is loneliness disguised as insight. Speculation turns cosmic again. What if the universe too bears this burden? Every star that forms, every particle that interacts, adds to the total information content of the cosmos. Some physicists say that when entropy reaches maximum, when all differences are erased, the universe will stop recording. No more change, no more time. Perfect knowledge equals perfect stillness. Creation ends not in fire, but in understanding. Philosophy finds balance in humility. To know is necessary, but to surrender is essential. The mind cannot carry infinity. We build systems to remember for us machines, archives, codes, but even they decay. Perhaps forgetting is mercy. Perhaps ignorance is the only space where life can move. The weight of knowing reminds us that to be finite is not failure, it is structure. Science continues, indifferent. Observatories scan new skies, data flows, algorithms learn. The memory of Atlas becomes one entry among millions, a case study in fragility. Yet beneath this routine lies awe. Each discovery adds gravity to the mind, and still we seek more. Curiosity itself defies fatigue. Perhaps that is how the universe ensures its continuation, by keeping us just ignorant enough to keep looking. Philosophy closes without closure. The weight of knowing is not meant to crush, only to remind. Knowledge does not free us from darkness. It teaches us to see within it. The traveller broke apart, and in understanding its fracture, we learned our own. Every equation, every balance, every image pulled from the void becomes mirror. We look outward and see ourselves, heavier, smaller, but still reaching. What remains is not the knowledge itself, but the motion toward it. The universe bends beneath awareness, yet awareness keeps expanding. Perhaps that is the balance to carry the weight and still move, to know and still wonder, to see the edge of understanding and not fall silent before it. To remember everything is to stop living. Memory accumulates until it becomes weight, and weight slows the motion of time. Somewhere between knowing and tshos, there must be forgetting, and the universe teaches this in every orbit, in every decay. What phase allows what remains to move, or... Science recognizes forgetting as pattern. Stars burn fuel, exhaust themselves, collapse, and from their remnants new stars are born. Cells die, and their fragments form others. Memory in biology is always selective. The brain forgets to make space for new patterns. Even within the code of life, erasure is a function. The cosmos erases to renew. Philosophy sees in this a mercy. To forget is not to lose truth. It is to let truth breathe. If every sorrow, every fracture, every brightness stayed forever vivid, existence would freeze into reflection. Forgetting opens the space for return, for surprise, for hope. Silence without forgetting is imprisonment. Then silence with forgetting becomes peace. Speculation extends the thought beyond Earth. Perhaps other minds, far older than ours, have already learned the balance. Perhaps they remember enough to guide, but not enough to grieve. Civilizations may survive not by recording everything, but by allowing erasure. To persist, they must forget their own perfection. The edge of forgetting may be the secret of endurance. Science grounds the idea in observation. Even archives built to last decay. Radiation flips bits, dust settles on lenses, tapes demagnetize. The data of 3i Atlas will fade like starlight, scattered until only noise remains. That loss is not failure, it is symmetry. The comet broke, the image faded. The record will vanish. The cycle closes cleanly. Philosophy turns inward. The mind is not a machine for preservation. It is an ocean of changing currents. We remember only what continues to shape us, and what does not must dissolve. Forgetting is the tide that keeps memory alive. Without its rhythm, thought would stagnate. To forget is to allow new light to enter. Thriller lingers in what forgetting feels like. The watchers who once traced the comet now find their memories thinning. Details blur, names drift away. The faces of those nights, the sound of static, the smell of machines cooling, all fade, yet the feeling remains. The ache of awe, the quiet fear, the weight of distance. Emotion endures when detail dissolves. Perhaps that is how the universe remembers, through feeling rather than form. Speculation whispers that even the universe will forget itself. When expansion has gone too far, when galaxies fall beyond view, when even black holes evaporate, the last photons will drift without witness. Then forgetting will be complete, not tragedy, but rest. The cosmos will sleep, its dreams free of structure. Science does not call this death, it calls it equilibrium. Energy evenly share, information diffuse. The edge of forgetting is also the horizon of peace. Beyond it, there is no before or after, only stillness. The same stillness that filled the dark before the first light. Philosophy closes softly. To forget is to return. Every life, every world, every star will one day reach this boundary. And when it does, there will be no fear, only the quiet certainty that what has been known does not vanish. It only releases its shape. What we call forgetting is simply the universe remembering differently. The fragments of Atlas are gone, the images erased, the stories fading. but their absence is not emptiness. It is the room left open for the next traveller, the next question, the next light waiting to be found. After forgetting comes continuation. What was lost returns, not as memory but as pattern. The universe does not end, it rearranges. Every silence that follows an ending is not void, but transition. The continuum is quiet, yet it moves with perfect certainty. Science shows this movement in its simplest laws. Energy cannot disappear, matter only changes form. Photons leave stars, scatter through dust, and become the faint warmth between galaxies. Even when stars fade, their heat still hums. The continuum is this hum, endless, slow, unstoppable. Philosophy calls it endurance without identity. The self dissolves, but continuity remains. What breaks apart returns as element. The dust of one world builds another. The silence of one life becomes the breath of another. Nothing stands still long enough to die. Speculation gives this truth its wonder. If fragments of 3i Atlas drift forever outward, they may one day join new systems, new skies. A grain from the traveller could seed ice on another world, or fall into the core of a growing star, or in a billion years, that star might warm new life, and that life might one day look outward, tracing another comet through the dark. The continuum carries every story forward, reshaped, unnamed. Science describes this as conservation. The total energy of existence does not change. What we call endings are only conversions. Starlight becomes shadow. Impact becomes dust. Dust becomes air. Each form is temporary, but the motion never ceases. The quiet continuum is the unbroken pulse beneath creation. Philosophy finds comfort in this stillness. The idea that nothing is ever truly lost allows the mind to rest. Fear fades when permanence is redefined. The meaning of life is not to remain, but to move within this endless exchange. Continuity replaces survival. Thriller remains only as tension between awareness and surrender. To live knowing that the self is transient is both liberation and ache. The watchers who once followed the comet understand this now. They cannot recall the details of what they saw, but they still feel its gravity, the pull of something vast and calm. Their silence is not emptiness, it is agreement. Speculation stretches further. If consciousness itself is process, not object, then it too belongs to the continuum. Each thought dissolves into others. Each mind adds to the field of awareness that the universe sustains. Perhaps in this way, all who ever lived remain connected, not by memory, but by motion. The quiet continuum might be what we have always called eternity. Science finds reflection even in decay. Radioactive elements transmute slowly, ticking like clocks of matter. Cosmic rays pass through our bodies, reminders that we are part of what never stops. To exist is to move is to participate. Stillness is illusion, even silence vibrates. Philosophy rests at this edge. The continuum asks nothing and promises nothing. It simply is. To understand it is to release the need for permanence. The traveller broke, the watchers forgot, the data vanished, but the motion remains. The same current that carried the comet carries us. The quiet continuum does not end. It sands, infinite yet intimate, vast yet near. The sky above holds no trace of the traveller now, but the air, the dust, the light still carry the same rhythm. It is the soundless breathing of everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. There is no sound in the place where the comet once was, only the slow drift of dust, only the thin light of distant stars. What remains of 3i Atlas moves beyond every measure, fragments scattered so far that even memory loses direction. Yet in that vanishing lies the quiet truth of all things that travel. Science ends with description. The last data fades, the last photon escapes, and still the universe continues. Energy disperses, entropy spreads, and from that spreading comes balance. The quiet beyond events is not death. It is restoration. The silence is the equilibrium of everything that has spoken. Philosophy calls this return. Every story moves towards stillness, not to be erased, but to be absorbed, meaning expands until it meets its own edge, then folds back into simplicity. The comet was movement, then fracture, then light. We were its witnesses. then its echo. Now we are its silence. Speculation lets the image continue. Somewhere in the dark, the dust of Atlas drifts through unlit space, joining clouds that will one day collapse into new suns. Those suns will burn, their light will travel, and one evening far away, another eye will rise to watch. They will not know our names, nor the travellers, but they will inherit the same question that shaped us. What is it that breaks yet endures? Science measures time, but silence ignores it. The photons of Atlas will keep moving, their energy thinning until it blends with the background hum of creation. Each particle will become part of something else. Perhaps one will strike a sensor, spark a signal, start another story. The continuum allows no final moment. Philosophy closes its hands around the quiet. To listen to the universe is to realize that endings are illusions. What we call the conclusion is only the moment when perception grows still enough to feel continuity. The return to silence is not withdrawal, it is transformation, the change from motion to meaning. Thriller remains in the tension of knowing that silence is alive. The watchers still hear it in machines cooling, in air thick with static, in the pause before dawn. They cannot tell if it is memory or presence. The difference no longer matters. In that uncertainty lies peace. Speculation breathes one last thought. If the universe speaks in segments, then every listener adds to the chorus. Every world, every observer, every fragment drifting through the dark becomes part of that slow eternal voice. The return to silence is not disappearance, but harmony restored. Science offers no conclusion. It cannot describe the feeling of the moment after discovery. The instant when the last image fades and the data stops, yet the mind remains open, waiting. Perhaps that waiting is the true state of the cosmos, an endless listening, patient and complete. Philosophy ends where sound begins again. The quiet is not empty. It is full of light too faint to see, full of echoes too far to reach. Everything that has been known still moves through it, and everything yet to be known waits within it. The night remains, the stars breathe slowly, and somewhere between them, silence carries the memory of what was broken and what still travels unending.